Hello, thank you for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into the annular lunar eclipse of the 5th of June, 8:13 p.m. Universal Central Time in the sign of Sagittarius. Now what I will do is explain the event, so not just the isolated lunar eclipse itself, but how the chart for the whole event is going to impact on the next 6 months on us all. And then after this I'm going to do an in-depth analysis of each of the 12 zodiac signs. Thank you so much for having joined me. I do hope if you've not visited before or yet to do so, that you would feel that you could subscribe. It would be very much appreciated. Also, you can chat with me directly on Twitter. Please search for Patrick Arundell at Horoscope Ace, or join my wife and I for our daily astrology and spirituality show, which we started a month ago. It's proving very popular, great fun. You can get your free daily horoscope every single day underneath each video. Please see the playlist beneath this video. Also, if you'd like to go above and beyond your zodiac sign and embrace more serious personal astrology, please check out my very affordable astrology reports beneath this video, or you can choose to have a one-to-one with me and can see my testimonials below. So here we go. This is the event chart for the Sagittarius annular eclipse. So the moon is in the sign of Sagittarius at 15 degrees. Now that's really interesting, because the decan that governs this particular part of Sagittarius is not controlled by Jupiter, it's controlled by Mars. And Mars, of course, is a very lively, initiating and self-affirming, individual affirming energy. So there's a lot of fire around this particular placement. On the other side of the heavens, of course, we have the Sun in exact opposition. Also, like Sagittarius, in a mutable sign. Mutable signs flex, they're not rigid, and they tend to have an ability to adapt, whereas fixed signs tend to like a degree of permanence and regularity. So flexibility is going to be a feature for the next 6 months. So what is Sagittarius energy? Well, it's very freedom-loving, it's very independent, and it can be forthright. And because this particular moon is in the second decan of Sagittarius, and the energy of Mars is there as well, I feel that this is going to give it more vulnerability. Now, if you joined me before, you'll know that I also use the Dward system, the 12th harmonic, which comes from Indian astrology primarily. This is where we divide each of the 30 degrees of each sign by 12, which gives us 2.5 degree slots. So the Dward for this particular moon is actually, ironically, Gemini, and the Dward for this sun position is Sagittarius. So they're in juxtaposition. Now the ascendant for this event is also Sagittarius. This is very significant. It's actually in the first decan, so governed by Jupiter, which is very much about living in the moment. It's about optimism. It's about expansion. But Sagittarius ascendant people, when relationships don't work, tend to break the tie quite quickly and suddenly. Now that's interesting. If we look at where the collection of energy gathered around the Sun is, it's all in the 7th house, which is very Libra. You can also see the ruler of Libra, Venus, is conjunct the Sun just by 3 degrees. So this event is very Libran in terms of it's very much about relating. But sometimes when we're explaining the 7th house, we can get caught up as astrologers in talking about the more harmonizing potential, or talking about partnerships. We're talking about how we interact. We're talking about listening skills, which are all to do with the higher dimension of Libran energy. We're also talking about balance. But the 7th house also represents open enemies. So those are the people that we have to tussle with, colleagues we might not like very much, but we have to work every day around. Or it could be people that we are involved with family members or friends who maybe have got some elements of their nature that we find a bit tricky. So it's possible with the moon being in such a freedom-loving area and that potential for, with the ascendant, to cut things that aren't working, if our goodwill and our generosity of spirit in this very Libra-dominated Gemini Sun position is abused, I think some people may be looking to jump away from a relationship that isn't working. Now, this potential for a sudden change is not always there on a 7th house, 1st house polar axis lunar eclipse. And essentially what we're talking about is trying to find greater emotional fulfillment, because that's what the moon's about. So the moon in Sagittarius could mean that perhaps a relationship needs to reinvent itself, so each party gives each other a bit more space, but still values the things they share in common. But I think what really defines this event chart is Mars. Mars is in the sign of Pisces, also a mutable sign, in the 3rd house, which is about quick, very Gemini-like energy, quick thinking. But Mars is a very subterranean influence in the watery sign of Pisces. It's also relatively close to Neptune, and it forges an exact T-square. You see the moon at 15 degrees, the sun at 15 degrees, and Mars at 15 degrees. So this T-square creates a stress. Now Mars square the sun creates a kind of urgent energy, but also the potential for impatience. But if we think about the whole solar journey, which begins at 0 degrees in Aries, the Aries point or the vernal point, and we take that as the 1st house, it means that Gemini energy is the 3rd sign, the 3rd house, and Pisces is the 12th. And the tension that's caused between Mars and the sun suggests that there can be some revelations that are coming. And they're going to come to some quite well-known public figures over the next week or so, because Mars is going to inch forward and be exactly conjunct this Neptune position. But these two are going to continue to square up to the sun right through to the 18th of June. So we've got some way to go. There's going to be revelations. Now those revelations could be around your relationships too. Someone may blurt something out, Mars, in the 3rd house, that they've been suppressing the subconscious emotionally. Mars in Pisces can see our more volatile energies be quite a spectrum between quite tearful and quite angry. So I feel that there's going to be steam that's been building up out of sight, quietly, secretly perhaps, is going to explode into the open. And it can happen particularly over the next couple of weeks, but it can be a feature of the next year, next 6 months, I beg your pardon. And that 6-month period is going to be fascinating because, of course, Trump and Boris Johnson are both Geminis, and there has been a lot of controversy around both of their time as the leaders of their respective countries. But more specifically about this particular chart, I think what we're going to see is Mars can give that greater impulse, particularly with this moon position in the decan governed by Mars. I think it's going to give much more urgency to people trying to escape situations which are no longer working for them. And because the Sagittarius ascendant tends to cut ties quicker probably than any other sign, because it's fire but also mutable, so it goes whoosh, it's gone. So if you're in a relationship, you're trying to deal with someone who's pretty tricky and you don't quite know where they're coming from, or you feel they're withholding something or keeping something back, being secretive, you don't really always know, you're getting a gut feeling that you don't really know where they're coming from, you must look to assert your need for truth, which is very Sagittarian. And if you can't tease the truth into the open, and find some consensus, very seventh house, then that can bring some much more combustible energies to the fore. Now, the other influence which is really prominent in this particular chart is a trine between Uranus and also Mercury. Mercury is now in Cancer, not its favourite location. It's going to be there through to the 4th of August. So that's a really long transit for Mercury. But in this particular chart, I think what it's saying is that there can be some innovations that keep coming through, and they can be very much to do with healing, I feel. And so hopefully we're going to hear more and more good news about different antibody tests, potential for vaccines, better technology in terms of track, trace and isolate, because some of the technology that's been launched, certainly in Britain, wasn't working very well. So there can be an improvement with those things. But I think as a chart as a whole, it's saying to all of us that we need to flex our communicational skills to listen better with this 7th house energy in Gemini. We need to find consensus where we can, and we can, but we also need to be aware that nobody owns anybody. So in any relationship, we can only come together as two cooperative bodies that decide to collaborate. And once someone starts to decide what's best for somebody, Mars in Pisces, but not necessarily in an obviously controlling way, there may be an impulse to escape, or escape something that isn't giving us the nourishment around our relationships that we really want. Hello, and now for the zodiac sign forecast for this eclipse. Aries, with your ruler buried away in your 12th solar house, I do feel that your past or your experience of life, your accumulated experience, can inform your actions in a very powerful way at this time. This is going to actually increase over the next week or so through to the middle of June. But then you really have an opportunity to be much more free-spirited, particularly once Mars moves into your sign on the 28th of June, where it's going to be for the last 6 months of this year. So perhaps what this chart is telling us, if we look at the Sagittarian energy, which of course is fiery, and the fact it's in the second decan, governed by your ruler Mars, is that you need to be really determined to get to the truth of what's really good for you at a deeper emotional and psychological level. Don't compromise. And even if you are still hankering for someone from your past, I do feel that by the end of this month, you will have drawn a line in the sand if it really isn't going to work, and you're sailing anew into a new adventure. And this particular annular eclipse can give you lots of support. There's lots of freshness, lots of potential for your words and your interactions to actually have a great impact on other people. Don't be surprised if people are really drawn to the way you speak, or if you play music or sing. That can be a very alluring feature about you. So I think you are going through a bit of a transition just at the moment, but it's all preparing the ground for a much fresher last 6 months of this year. Now Taurus, a few signs have an appreciation of the good things in life as much as you. I have quite a bit of second house energy in my chart, which is very Taurus. So whether you're someone who likes to get your hand into soil and be in nature a lot and live in a more aesthetic way, or you're someone who loves a bit of lush and glam, really they're drawn by the same principles. It is the Venus ruler of your sign, and because Venus is very strong on the Sun on this particular lunation, I do feel over the next month and six months there is going to be a bit of a challenge to you to resist some of the calorific goodies that we can all be drawn to, but particularly when we're a bit bored or perhaps feeling a little bit low. And so if you really want to stay disciplined, I think you need to stay active. So the impulse for you coming from Mars's T-square with these two influences is I think to be more active, But if you are wanting to transform your situation financially, especially if you've been really affected in a negative way by the influence of COVID, the only thing I would say to you is don't jump into a relationship with a friend or a group of people without an awful lot of forethought and care. So avoid being impulsive about finance at this time, and also be realistic about money in relation to the more idealistic side of your nature. Now Gemini, of course, with the eclipse in your opposite sign, it could be that someone's going to challenge you about the individual approach you have to life. And if people feel that you have been a little bit caught up in your own bubble, then that could be a bit hard to hear. And the way it happens can actually be quite direct, because Mars is in a very prominent part of your horoscope. So if people are calling you to account, they can do so quite forcefully. On the other hand, you could quite skillfully use the extra confidence that Mars is giving you to reach out to others with a great deal of deft care, because Venus being on the Sun can draw magic to you. But you just need to be sincere, and I do feel that if you're trying to re-engineer a fresh approach to your career, getting things in balance between your individual creativity and what's going to work in the wider world is going to be the trick. Now Cancer, this particular location of the Sun and Venus is in your 12th solar house, and yet the Mars position is in your sector of escapism and adventurism. It's not easy to be very adventurous at this present time, whereas the Moon is in a very practical location, which is about your everyday structure. It's to do with work, it's to do with organisation, health, fitness and diet in a more practical way. But the Sun and Venus are in a more psychological area. I think what Mars is saying to you in its influence of the polar axis on the eclipse itself is that something could come to the surface over the next month or 6 weeks that could prove to be a bit uncomfortable actually. Perhaps it's going to be about a relationship. Someone could confront you with their truth. It might not be yours, but with their truth. But then on the other side of the astral coin, it's possible you can learn a great deal from this process. Equally, what you can do is use Mars in a very positive way to seek liberation from old psychological chains, particularly around your personal relationships. So if you've been burnt in the past, we've all been burnt at one time or another, then I feel this is a good time to start to move on from these things. But it does mean embracing the more tender and vulnerable side of your nature, which you can keep very carefully hidden away, and perhaps it does need to come into the sunlight a little bit, shared with a compassionate person or a guide, a spirit guide, who can help to clear your way forwards. Now Leo, this is quite a glorious annular lunar eclipse in some ways for you, because it's all about choice. And the choices can be about where you spend your time and who with. So it can be socially, it can be more romantically. If you're single, somebody who's in your social group or wider circle, some kind of introduction could be made in the next 6 months, which can prove to be significant. But with Mercury tucked up in your 12th solar house, although it is forging a great link with Uranus on this event chart, I think that could see you a bit more withdrawn through to the 4th of August, just weighing up your options. What's Mars about? Well, Mars, to be honest, is in quite a warlike position for you. So around your romantic situation or a group dynamic, if there is possessiveness or control that's not very positive for you, I think you can manifest some kind of freedom or release over the next month and 6 months with the help of that Sagittarius energy. But because you're a fixed sign, you don't generally find change easy. So the mutable energies of this particular annular eclipse can be very useful to you, but you've got to embrace them. Now Virgo, of course Mars is in your opposite sign along with Neptune. Neptune's been beguiling you or confusing you in turn around your relationship since 2012. Mars is giving you a lot more sort of assertiveness, really, since it moved into Pisces, because Mars in the 7th house makes you ready for competition. It makes you more inclined to engage with things that are a bit awkward. But the moon in this particular situation is in the tender 4th house. Is there something that's out of kilter between your work and your home or emotional needs and a relationship? Only you can answer this question, but if there is, it's going to be revealed over the next month or 6 months in a wider basis. But if you're looking for a job, don't underestimate the benefits of Venus conjunct the Sun. That's going to give you enormous charm, which, as long as you're sincere, if you're going through any interviews, that can be very, very helpful to you. It does square Mars, but perhaps what that can do is push you to be a bit more assertive. The only trick I would say to you is just don't try too hard. There can be a tendency when the Sun and Mars are squaring up to be a little bit too sort of too urgent. So just stay in the moment, stay cool, but stay in touch with your emotions. That is vital on this eclipse. Now, Libra, because the position of the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the path of fortune and the North Node are all in the 7th house, which is very Venusian, and your ruler, of course. And we also have Venus, your ruler, so close to the Sun. I think this is a fascinating challenge and opportunity for you, because Mars is in that part of your horoscope that's to do with where you make sacrifices. And I think you've probably been making quite a lot since 2012. But it's okay to give as long as we're really appreciated, or there's boundaries, so that other people say, look, you've covered so-and-so shift, you've been very helpful and supportive, it's time for you to have some free time. If you're in an organisation like that, this may have shown itself, or you work for yourself and you've been able to assert when you will give and when you will withdraw to give to yourself. That's fine. If that's been a problem, Mars is giving you a little bit more desire to assert your need for a greater personal organisation. So I just feel that if you have been suffering with a little bit of stress, or you felt a bit nervous or anxious recently, or you've wanted to escape from the confines of a situation, then Mars is giving you a bit more desire to push for what you need. But that may require some kind of reorganization, or perhaps even applying for another job. If you do apply for a job, don't be surprised if it does require some travel, or it involves dealing with people in a different dimension, even despite this COVID-19 lockdown. Scorpio, this eclipse occurs in your 2nd solar house of everyday resources. So it's kind of saying to you, if you're spending more than you're kind of getting in, then try to trim that back. Now that's easy to say. If you're really struggling with COVID-19 in terms of income, it could feel very oppressive at the moment and very stressful, and I really feel for you if so. What Venus and the Sun combining on the other side of the heavens are doing is giving you a great deal of desire. So if your finances aren't right, the desire to change that can be strong over the next 6 months. But I think this eclipse is going to affect you much more in terms of your romantic situation. And if you're in a loveless relationship, or something isn't feeding a sense to feel really alive and vital, this eclipse could change. You could want to break free of something, even if it gives you a degree of stability and some foundations in your world. If you want real connection to someone that's very, very transformational and at the same time exciting and fun, then a big change can occur for you over the next 6 months. Now, Sagittarius, this eclipse occurs in your sign. That's smashing. That's all about you actualizing your individual needs and energy. But it's making you mindful of your relationships. So if you've got a relationship where for you it feels all give and not much get back, this is going to make you think twice. Also, however much you are fond of someone in your world, if they tend not to be able to tune into the more emotional side of your nature, Mars being in your 4th solar house is going to see you putting your foot down and in a no-nonsense way. But that can only be a good thing. I think basically Mars is pushing you to be a bit tougher about what you need. Because Neptune's been in your fourth solar house since 2012, perhaps your home or emotional life has been a bit dreamy. Mars is helping you to be more realistic, although that energy will really start to manifest itself from the 18th of June. And that brings us to Capricorn. Now the eclipse occurs in your 12th house, which is very psychological, and on the other side of the heavens, the Sun and Venus are in your 6th house of work. If work is an area which is not giving you much personal satisfaction, I think the link between Mars and the Sun is pushing you to really go beyond what you've known as being comfortable before, and just see if you can snaffle yourself something different, apply for those jobs. But if you're in a situation where your colleagues don't tend to be very upfront or clear, or there's not much transparency, then do stick out for what you really need, because there's a great link between Mercury and Uranus. A dazzling connection can just emerge from the ether, so do be ready for that. Now Aquarius, the link between Venus and the Sun is actually really beautiful and can provide a lot of extra romance for you over the next 6 months. What's not to like? You're only really going to have an issue if anyone that you're involved or attracted to can't accept the fact that as an Aquarius, your friendships and group involvements and your wider interests are actually very important to you, and you don't like to sacrifice them too easily. So your need to still be an individual is very much still to the fore. But if you are involved with someone where it's not working so well, avoid the temptation to splash out on generous or extravagant gifts in order to try to impress them. That's Mars in the 2nd house. Can join in with Neptune over the next week or so. It's not going to be a good thing. You need to feel that a relationship is working and that someone shares your kind of value system, however very attracted to them you may be. But generally, I think this lunar eclipse can be very good for you over the next 6 months, and hopefully for me here in Astral Towers too. And finally, but not least, that brings us to Pisces. And of course, because the midpoint of this event is in your sign and combines with Mars, and Mars is pretty close to your co-ruler, co-regent of Neptune, then this is a time when you can think more about the individual needs you have. But any moves you make are probably going to play out in terms of your feelings being very close to the surface, because of the where the ascendant is in Sagittarius and the moon as well. That's your midheaven, your solar midheaven. But for me, I really would be surprised if you moved in the next 6 months. And if you do, you're going to want extra comfort, extra space, good light, a lovely garden. Your tick list, your bucket list about your perfect environment will need to be met for you to really feel satisfied. But equally, Mars clashing with the Sun and also the annular eclipse just suggests that you're not too impatient about it, not just because of COVID, but because of the dynamics of this particular astrological event. If you try to drive it, it may not happen as you wish. So it's kind of like, it's a bit like running a marathon. I run a few in my time, and I used to find that if I ran a bit slower than I knew I could, actually by halfway through the race I was purring along, no stitch. I wasn't collapsing at the end and needing a foil blanket around me. But if I tried to go too quick, you know, soon I'd lose my rhythm. So stay within yourself, set your intent for this change of abode or an improvement to where you live. But I think there's a good chance that can happen over the next 6 months. So that concludes the zodiac sign forecast. But as I say, if you want to ascend above your zodiac sign, embrace real astrology based on your time, date and place of birth. No two natal charts are ever exactly the same. And if you could check out underneath this video my chart store, you'll see they're very affordable, but they give you so much information which can help to guide your moves so much more in so much more of an informed way. But for now, it's been a real pleasure being with you. Do take care, stay safe, and goodbye from me here.